darlings, Mimi G here with another sew along. Today we're going to be working on one of my new summer patterns for simplicity, pattern 8123. We're going to be making view B. Now if you're new to sewing or you just need a little refresher course, make sure to visit the link in the description box below for my sewing basics video. I talk about how to choose the right pattern size, how to cut your paper pattern, how to cut your fabric, and how to understand all the words that are written on your tissue paper. Once you watch that video, come back and sew along with me. Okay, let's review all the pieces that you should have cut out. You need to have cut out pattern piece number 16, which is the left skirt front for view B, which is the one that we are doing today. And you're going to be cutting out 1. You should have cut out pattern piece number 15, which is the right skirt front, and you also are cutting out just 1. Then you should have cut out pattern piece number 17, which is the skirt back, and you need to have cut out 2. Then you should have cut out pattern piece number 7, which is the left bodice front facing, and you should have cut out 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. Then pattern piece number 18, which is the left skirt front facing, and you also needed to cut out 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. For the bodice portion of our dress, you should have cut out pattern piece number 3, which is the bodice back, and you needed to have cut out 2. And then pattern piece number 1, which is the right bodice front, and you needed to cut out 1. Then you should have cut out pattern piece number 2, which is the left bodice front, and you also should have cut out only 1. Then you should have cut out pattern piece number 11, which is the left band, and you needed to cut out 2 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. Then you should have cut out pattern piece number 9, which is our shoulder straps, and you should have cut out 2. Then we have pattern piece number 12, which is the back band, and you needed to have cut out 4 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. And then pattern piece number 10, which is the right band, and you should have cut out 2 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. You should have 2 other pattern pieces, pattern piece number 19 and pattern piece number 13. These you do not cut out of fabric. These are simply your buttonhole guides. Okay, before we go to the sewing machine, I want to just go ahead and show you how I mark my darts before I sew them. So you should have pattern piece 1 and 2, which is the left and right front bodice. And you should have transferred all of your dots, notches, markings, including your dart lines. And so what I like to do is I like to fold my dart in half. So I want to make sure that my pin goes in on one line and then it comes out on the line on the back. That way you know that your dart is even on both sides. And so once you have it placed where you want it, go ahead and pin. And then you're going to do that one more time along the middle. Make sure it's coming out the same place in the back and pin. And then I like to pin at the very top just so that I know exactly where to stop. You're going to pin your darts, your other darts, the same exact way. Okay, we're going to start with pattern piece number 2, and we're going to sew our dart starting at the bottom. Just follow your marking. And instead of back stitching when you get to the end, you're going to simply sew right off of your fabric. Pull your threads, and instead of back stitching, you're going to grab your 2 threads and you're going to make a knot. Make about 2 or 3 knots just to make sure that your stitching doesn't come undone. The reason we don't backstitch is so that you don't end up with a little bump at the tip of your bust darts or your waist darts. So you simply just make a knot. And you do that 2 or 3 times. You're going to do your other darts the same exact way. Okay, we're going to go ahead and pin our sides to our fronts. So I want you to grab pattern piece number 3, which is your bodice back. And with right sides facing and working on the left, right first, we're going to place our back on top of our left front, and we're going to align our notches first and then pin there. And then pin again one more time at the bottom, and then pin at the top. And then we're going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to do the same thing with the right front and the remaining bodice back piece. Pin, and then we can sew them together. Okay, I'm starting with my left front and my bodice back. We have it pinned. We're going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Grab your remaining front and back bodice and sew using 5/8 seam allowance. Now go ahead and finish your side seams either with your serger or with pinking shears or a zigzag stitch if you so wish, and then press your seams to one side. Okay, now that we have our bodice back attached to both our right and our left and right front bodices, we're going to set these aside for just a second, and we're going to attach our skirts. So grab your back, skirt back, which is pattern piece number 17. And we'll work with one at a time. And then we're going to be attaching both our left and our right fronts to each back piece. So you want to make sure that you're aligning notches so that you know you're at the right place and that you're facing right sides facing, your fabric is right sides facing. And go ahead and pin your left skirt front to one back. Notches let you know that you're placing the right 2 pieces together, so you always want to make sure that you pin at your notches first. I'm going to pin at the bottom and then maybe pin one more time. And then we're going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then grab your remaining back piece and your left skirt front, and you're going to make sure that you pin at the side, matching that notch. Pin there first. Now that we have both of these pinned at our sides, we're going to sew and then sew. Okay, starting at the hem, we're going to sew our side seam together. Go ahead and sew your remaining front and back of your skirt the same way. Okay, once you have attached your right front to your back and your left front to your left back, go ahead and press your seams to one side, and then we're going to go ahead and attach our bodice to our skirt. So what you're going to do is we're going to be working with our right side first. So this is the right side, and you should make sure that your notch is aligned. So with the right sides facing, I'm going to place my bodice on top of my skirt. Turn this over just a bit. And you should have 2 notches that align, and then 2 notches that align here. And of course your center, your side seam. So we're going to go ahead and start pinning. I'm going to pin at my side seam first. And then I'm going to make sure that I align my notch, and I'm going to pin there. And then my other notch, and I'm going to pin there. And then I'm just going to do one more at the front. And we're going to sew this together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. But before we do that, we're going to pin our left sides the same way. So grab your other skirt and your other bodice, and you're going to do the same thing. We're going to pin first at our side seams, then we're going to pin at our notches. I'm going to pin here at the front. And now that I have it all pinned, we're going to go ahead and sew both of these together. Okay, I'm going to start with my right bodice and skirt, and I'm going to start stitching using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance across the entire waist, joining the bodice to the skirt. Now I've joined my bodice to my skirt, and you're going to do the same thing to the remaining bodice and skirt piece. Okay, now that we've attached our bodice to our skirts for both our left and our right sides, go ahead and press your seams, your waist seam, up towards the bodice, and then set these aside for just a bit. Okay, I want you to grab pattern piece number 7 and pattern piece number 18, which is our facings. And we're going to place them right side facing. And we're going to pin at our notch. So you should have a notch on each end of each piece. And we're going to pin there, and we're going to sew these together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, creating a full facing for our bodice and our skirt. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and attach our facings together. Okay, and what I want you to do is I want you to press your seam up towards the bodice facing. Then we're going to attach this to our dress. Okay, working on the left side of our dress right now, we're going to go ahead and place our facing, right sides facing, over our dress, and make sure that your notches are aligning. You should have 2 notches, and you're going to pin. And then of course make sure that your seam lines at your waist match up, and pin there. And then you have another double notch at the skirt, so pin there. And then you should have a dot that you marked, so go ahead and pin there. Now we're going to attach our facing to our dress. Okay, starting at the bottom, we're going to start sewing where that dot is. So I want you to put your needle where that dot is. We're stitching using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you're going to sew and backstitch just a bit, and then continue. Okay, now we're going to understitch. So what I want you to do is I want you to open up your facing. Make sure that your seam allowance is facing your facing. And then starting again at the bottom, we're going to stitch close to the edge, only on our facing. Now you can turn your facing to the inside and give it a press. Okay, so now we have our facing stitched, understitched, and pressed to the inside. And now we're going to attach the right side of our dress to the left side of our dress. And so what I want you to do is go ahead and grab your right side, and you'll notice that you have this weird kind of shape. That's because we're attaching it where our facing is. So what I want you to do is I want you to place your right side's facing and then pin at your notch, so you have a notch here. And of course I want you to pin making sure that your waist seam lines match up. And then we're going to go ahead and pin at the other notch. And you're going to notice that one has a little more give than the other. We're simply going to ease it as we're stitching it. So if that means that we're going to pull a bit while we stitch, or that we're going to need to make a small clip into our fabric, depending on how much stretch you have. And then you have one more notch. I want you to go ahead and pin there. and you're going to ease that portion in as well. Okay, now we're going to continue to pin the rest of the facing to the dress. And then you have a notch in the skirt portion. You're going to pin there too. And I'm going to pin at the bottom. I'm going to turn this over. We're going to start stitching at the first notch on our bodice. So we're not going to be stitching all the way up. So make sure that you have a pin at that notch so you know to stop there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch at the bottom, starting at the hem. We're going to stitch all the way up until you reach that dot, which you should have marked onto your fabric. We're going to pivot, sew across, and then sew all the way up until we get to our pin. Okay, starting at the hem, we're going to start stitching using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, attaching our left part of our dress to the right part of our dress. I'm going to put my needle right at that dot and I'm going to pivot. And then I'm going to pivot, making sure that I'm still at that 5/8 of an inch. Okay, now I'm going to ease this fullness in. So I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to make a couple of snips into the side that does not have that give. I'm going to turn my dress over to the other side just to make it easier on myself. I'm going to put my needle in where I know I'm stopping at that notch. And now I'm going to pull slightly, easing that fullness in. You'll start to see these little clips start to stretch. Now I've eased in all of that fullness without having to create basting stitches. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and press everything that we just sewed together towards the left side, right? We have our front facing here, so we want to make sure everything is facing this way. And then what you're going to do is you're going to press this seam open like you see I did here. And then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to baste across the top of the facing. So you just want to baste it so that it stays in place as we continue. And then of course we stopped at that notch, which is why we don't have this completely sewn to the top. Okay, now we're going to work on our band. So you should have 2 pieces for number 12. So we cut 4, but we're only working with 2 right now. You should have only 1 for pattern piece 11. The other one is for our facing, so we're going to set that aside. And then I want you to have 1 number 10. So what you're going to do is you're going to place 1 number 12 with each of these. So this is for the left side of our dress, and this is for the right side of our dress. So what we're going to do is we're going to place right sides facing. And what we're going to do is we're going to match our notches first. So grab 112, place it right sides facing over the top of pattern piece number 11. And you want to make sure that the dots for your strap are at the top for both. At the top and at the top. And you're going to see that it's angled, which is normal. It looks a little weird, but it's the way it's supposed to be. And make sure that you're matching your notch and pin there. And we're going to stitch this down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're going to do the same thing with 10 and 12. Making sure that your dots are at the top. Go ahead and match your notch and pin. Now go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch these together. Now go ahead and press your seams open. Okay, now we're going to attach our band to our dress. So this is the left side, as you can see. And we're going to go ahead and make sure that our notches align. You should have 2 notches here on the bodice back. And then of course you're going to match your side seams. And this is going to extend. You have a notch here, so make sure that you're aligning your notch. And your band is going to extend, so don't worry about that. It's supposed to look that way. Go ahead and pin at the side seams. Pin at the double notch. And then you're going to do the same thing for the other side. So grab your other band. Okay, I'm going to start at the center back of one end. And we're going to back stitch. And we're going to sew all the way using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. When you get to the end here of the right side, I want you to make sure that that end is folded over, okay? So remember, we press that seam open. So your band is going to extend. And now you're going to continue on the other side. Make sure to move this out of the way so you don't accidentally catch it. And your left side is also going to extend. Now I want you to go ahead and press your seam allowance towards your band. Okay, as you can see, we have attached our band to both sides of our dress, extending at the front on each side, and then of course ending flushed at the center back. And I have pressed my seam allowance up towards my band, and I'm going to set this aside for 1 minute. We're going to sew our shoulder straps. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold these in half, and we're going to pin, maybe just once or twice, and we're going to sew our straps together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're going to attach our straps to our dress. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. You're going to stitch your other shoulder strap the same exact way. Okay, I have gone ahead and turned my shoulder straps right side out, and I have given them a good press. If you look at them closely, you'll notice that one has a sharper edge than the other one. One is a little flat, and one has more of a point. The flatter side is for the front, in case you didn't mark it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to place it onto our band. You should have 2 dots on your band letting you know where your shoulder strap is going to go. So I want you to make sure that the folded edge, not the side that has the seam, is facing the front edge. And I want you to place it in between those dots. And go ahead and pin. And then I want you to place your other end in between the dots that you should have. And I want you to make sure that the folded end of, or the folded edge, I should say, of your shoulder strap is facing your center back. And pin in between those dots. And you're going to do the same thing on the other side like I have done here. And now we're going to stitch across each shoulder strap. Okay, we're going to stitch down our shoulder straps. Make sure that they are flushed with our band. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and grab your remaining pattern pieces for number 10, 11, and 12, and you're going to construct your facings the same way that you did your band, attaching pattern piece 12 to 10 and pattern piece 12 to 11. Okay, so our straps are onto our band, and I have had you go ahead and sew your facings the same way that we did our band. You're just going to place these aside for right now, but we are going to use them after we attach our zipper. What you're going to do now is I went ahead and put some pins right here in this opening just to keep it together. But now what we're going to do is we're going to place right sides facing, and we're going to sew our center back and attach our zipper. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pin at this notch here. That's where our zipper is going to end. And I'm going to pin at the bottom, and I'm going to pin at the waistline, making sure that my waist seam line, I should say, is matching up, and also that the seam line on my band is matching up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew a basting stitch from the very top until we get to our notch. A basting stitch is the longest stitch that you have on your sewing machine. It's easy to remove. It's a temporary stitch just to hold two things together. So we're going to create a basting stitch from the top to this notch. Then we're going to switch back to a normal length stitch. We're going to back stitch, and we're going to sew a normal length stitch all the way down to our hem. Then we'll continue to attach our zipper. Okay, we're going to attach our zipper. So the first thing we're going to do, like I said, is we're going to sew our basting stitch. So using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and the longest stitch possible on your sewing machine, you're going to sew until we reach our notch. And now I'm going to back stitch, and I'm going to go back to my normal length stitch. And now I want you to go ahead and press this entire seam from the bottom all the way up open. Okay, so I have pressed my seam open, and I have all of my dress to one side. The only thing that I am going to be sewing on right now is this seam allowance. So make sure that everything else is to the left of you. And you're going to grab your zipper, and you're going to place the invisible side down. And I always use an extra long zipper so that I don't have to worry about this zipper pull being in my way. And I have just a regular zipper foot. It is not an invisible zipper foot. I use just a basic zipper foot that comes with your sewing machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sew a basting stitch, because I want to baste this side of my zipper tape to this side of my seam allowance. And I'm just going to be making sure that the center of my zipper is along the center of my seam. And you're going to stop when we get to that notch. And now we're going to turn this over, and we're going to be working from the bottom up, starting at that notch. Okay, now we're going to turn our dress to the right side, so right side's out. And now that we have our zipper basted and our seam lines match up nicely, that's why we pin and baste first, we're going to remove our basting stitch. So go ahead and remove it until we get to, of course, the notch where we changed back to a regular length stitch. So we're only removing our basting stitch. Okay, now I have opened my seam back up, and I'm going to open my zipper, And I'm going to put my zipper pull inside, and I'm going to pull it from the inside, moving it completely out of the way. Now this allows me to get really close without having to deal with that zipper pull being in my way, which is again why I use an extra long zipper. So I'm going to turn this back to the wrong side, and now we're going to permanently stitch our zipper in place. So go back to a normal length stitch and go ahead and put your zipper foot down. Now you're going to be sewing really close to this edge. And so what we're going to do is, as you're sewing, you're going to pull this open so that you could get close, but of course not stitch on your actual zipper teeth. Now you're going to sew just beyond where we stopped stitching and backstitch. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to turn to the other side and working from the bottom up. Now go ahead and close your zipper. Turn your dress to the right side. And now you have an invisible zipper installed. Now go ahead and grab your facings. Okay, we're almost done. We have our zipper installed. And now what we're going to do is we're going to attach our facings. Now you should have sewn your facings the same way that we did our band. And then what you're going to do is you're going to press under on the notched end a 1/2 inch all the way across the bottom. As you can see, I've done that here. My dots where my shoulder straps go are at the very top. That is not the edge where you fold over the 1/2 inch. It's the bottom. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to attach it. So with the dress facing me, the front of the dress facing me, I'm going to take my left band facing and I'm going to pin it at the edge, and then I'm going to make sure that my shoulder strap is facing down because we're going to sandwich that in between our facing and our band. And I'm going to pin. Maybe pin one more time in the middle. And then you're going to pin, of course, your side seam. And then work your way around to the back. Make sure your strap is facing down. Go ahead and open your zipper. And when you get to your zipper, instead of leaving it folded over, I want you to go ahead and open it. And I want you to pin. And then go ahead and grab the remaining band facing, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to pin, align your side seams, open out your zipper, and now we're going to stitch all the way across. Okay, now that we have our facing pinned to our band, I'm going to make sure that everything is out of my way. And I'm going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to pivot here. And I can feel where my zipper teeth are, and so I'm going to stitch close to that, closing this out, and back stitch. Now go ahead and trim off your corner. I'm going to trim a little bit of this off too. And now when I turn this over, go ahead and pull your zipper teeth. Now you have a nice finished zipper. And your facing is finished. And then go ahead and finish your other facing and corner the same way. Now that the center back is sewn together on both sides, we're going to go ahead and do the front of the dress. I'm going to pull my seam allowance down, And I'm going to close this using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And go ahead and trim your corners. That way you have a nice finished edge, and you can just go ahead and push your seam allowances to the inside. So I'm going to go ahead and trim. You can push your corner out. Then you can go ahead and turn your seam allowance back to the inside. And then we're going to close off the other end. So we're going to do the same thing. I want you to pull your seam allowance down. Make sure everything else is out of the way. I'm going to bring my seam allowance down, and I'm going to stitch. Trim your corner. And go ahead and tuck your seam allowance and pull out your corner. Now that we have our corners finished and our band in place and our facing done, we're going to do some understitching. So what I want you to do is I want you to make sure that your seam allowance is facing your facing. And we're going to go in as far as we can into that corner. And we're going to be stitching really close to the edge on the facing only. Okay, now go ahead and press your facing down. Okay, so we have done all of our understitching. Go ahead and clean anything up that you need to clean up. So remove any stitching, any basting threads. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have you pin down your facing because we're going to stitch over the top of this. And so we're going to be catching the facing as we're sewing. So go ahead and pin, making sure that you're catching the underside of that. And you're going to do that along the entire facing. And this will help keep everything in line while you're trying to stitch everything down. So just keep checking to make sure. Once you're done pinning your facing down, we're going to go ahead and top stitch. Okay, I have everything pinned down, and so now we're going to sew along the edge. I'd say about 1/8 or 1/16 away from the seam line. And as you sew, you're catching the facing on the inside. Continue until you have completely top stitched both sides of your neck of your band. Okay, so the only thing left for you to do is the handlebar dress and to go ahead and make your buttonholes and attach your buttons. Now I'm not going to do that on camera because I don't know what sewing machine you have. So what you're going to need to do is, if you don't know how to make buttonholes on your sewing machine, is to check the instruction manual that came with your sewing machine. So what you want to do is you want to use your guides to help you place your buttonholes where they're supposed to be. And so what you want to do is place it where it's supposed to go. It says waistline, so you know that that's where your waistline is going to go. And then you want to go ahead and mark where you see your lines. That's where you're going to be making your buttonholes. So you're going to be making 4 at the bottom, and then you're going to be making the ones for the top. 1 on your band, and then the rest along the bodice. Now all that's left to do is for you to finish the hem of your dress. And so I have pressed under 1.25 inches, and so then what you're going to do is you're going to turn under 1/4 inch. Now you could press this beforehand. I just want to show you on camera. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch very close to that edge all the way around. And so I'm just going to turn under 1/4 inch and stitch close to the edge. And you're going to continue that way until you are all done. I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. Until next time, peace.